There are two different places in Jerusalem that claim to be the site of the most important event in Christianity. One is a dark, incense-filled ancient church. The other is a peaceful outdoor garden. But only one can be real. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is the traditional site, but for a long time it looked too crowded to be the biblical location. In the 1880s, British General Charles Gordon found a cliffside that looked like a skull in a nearby tomb in a garden. This became the Garden Tomb, and for many, it felt more real. The investigation. In 2016, the world watched as National Geographic opened the inner tomb of the Holy Sepulchre for the first time in centuries. They were looking for the original limestone burial bed. Many expected it to be gone, destroyed by centuries of war. Under the marble, they found the first-century limestone shelf intact. But the real shocker was the dating of the mortar. It dated to 345 AD, exactly when the Romans said they built the first church there. Furthermore, the tomb is a bench tomb, which was the style for wealthy Judeans during the time of Jesus. While the Garden Tomb is beautiful, archaeology shows it was actually carved in the 8th century BC. It was already 700 years old when Jesus was born. The Holy Sepulchre, however, sits in an ancient quarry that was used as a garden in the 1st century. Even though the church is now inside the city walls, archaeology has proven that in the time of Jesus, this site was outside the walls, matching the biblical requirement perfectly. It's a tale of two tombs where the one that looks less like the Bible actually has the most scientific evidence. The Qumran Caves. In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd boy threw a rock into a dark cave looking for a lost goat. Instead of a goat, he heard the sound of breaking pottery. That sound was the shattering of 2,000 years of skepticism. Before 1947, the oldest Hebrew Bible we had was from the 10th century AD. Critics argued that over 1,000 years, the text must have been changed, corrupted, and edited like a giant game of telephone. They claimed we couldn't trust that the modern Bible looked anything like the original. The investigation. Inside the caves of Qumran, archaeologists found 981 different manuscripts, now known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. These were hidden by a desert sect called the Essenes before the Romans destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD. They had been preserved for 2 millennia by the dry, salty air of the Dead Sea. The crown jewel was the great Isaiah scroll. When scholars compared this Hebrew text from 100 BC to the Hebrew text from 900 AD, they were stunned. Despite a 1,000-year gap, the texts were 95% identical. The only differences were minor spelling variations. This discovery didn't just find a place, it verified a message. It proved that the ancient scribes were so meticulous that they didn't change a single significant word. Mount Horeb, the forbidden mountain. What if the most famous mountain in history, the place where Moses received the 10 Commandments, isn't in Egypt at all? For decades, explorers have pointed to a mysterious blackened peak in Saudi Arabia that looks like it was scorched by a blowtorch from the heavens. The traditional Mount Sinai in the Sinai Peninsula was chosen by Empress Helena in the 4th century, but it has one major problem. There is almost zero archaeological evidence of 1 million people wandering there. Critics have long argued that the Exodus never happened because we can't find the stage where it took place. But if you look at the Bible's geography, it says Moses fled to Midian. Historically, Midian isn't in Egypt. It's in modern-day Saudi Arabia. In the late 20th century, adventurers like Ron Wyatt and later researchers like Dr. Miles Jones began investigating Jabal al-Lawz. What they found was a checklist of biblical landmarks. At the base of the mountain, there's a massive altar covered in petroglyphs of Hathor-style cows, ancient Egyptian-style bulls that are not native to Saudi Arabia. This matches the story of the golden calf perfectly. The most striking feature of Jabal al-Lawz is its peak. While the rest of the mountain is a light-colored granite, The very top is jet black. When researchers broke open the rocks, they found they were light-colored on the inside. Only the exterior was cooked. The Bible says God descended onto the mountain in a consuming fire. Skeptics say it's just natural volcanic rock, but geological surveys show the mountain is granite, not volcanic. The final clue: nearby, there is a massive 60-foot tall rock that has been split perfectly down the middle. At the base of this split rock of Horeb, there are clear signs of water erosion in a place that hasn't seen consistent rain for thousands of years. It's a visual smoking gun for the miracle of water from the rock. The city of David and Hezekiah's tunnel, the most brutal empire the world had ever seen, is marching toward Jerusalem. King Hezekiah has two choices: surrender and watch his people be flayed alive, or pull off the greatest engineering heist in history. The Bible claims Hezekiah hid the city's water supply by digging a massive tunnel through solid rock to bring the Gihon spring inside the walls. For centuries, people asked how. They didn't have GPS, laser levels, or power drills. They had iron picks and oil lamps. How do you dig through 1,700 feet of bedrock and actually meet in the middle? In 1867, a real-life Indiana Jones named Charles Warren went exploring under the old city. He found a vertical shaft, but it wasn't until later that explorers found the full, winding S-shaped tunnel. It's a claustrophobic, dark, and wet passage that still flows with water today. But the skeptics still asked, is this really Hezekiah's? The answer was written on the wall, literally. In 1880, a boy swimming in the tunnel found a Paleo-Hebrew inscription carved into the rock. It's now known as the Siloam inscription. It doesn't praise a king, it praises the workers. It describes the heart-pounding moment when the two teams of diggers working from opposite ends finally heard each other's picks through the stone. It says, while there were still 3 cubits to be cut through, there was heard the voice of a man calling to his fellow. The explorers struck, each to meet his fellow, pick against pick, while the Assyrian king Sennacherib was outside the walls bragging that he had Hezekiah trapped like a bird in a cage. The people inside were drinking fresh water from a source the Assyrians couldn't find. Today, you can walk through this tunnel. You can touch the pick marks in the stone. You can see where the diggers went off course and corrected themselves. It is 533 meters of pure ancient adrenaline that proves the Bible's account of the Assyrian siege isn't just a legend. It's a historical record of a miracle of engineering. The Dome of the Rock, the foundation of the world. It is the most contested piece of real estate on the planet. To Muslims, it is the noble sanctuary. To Jews, it is the Temple Mount. But for the historian, it is the final boss of biblical archaeology. At the center of this golden dome structure lies a rugged, ancient piece of bedrock known as the foundation stone. This isn't just a rock, it is the physical anchor of the entire biblical narrative, stretching back 4,000 years to the very dawn of faith. To understand why this place matters, we have to go back long before the temples were built. According to biblical tradition, this rock is the summit of Mount Moriah. This is the exact location where God commanded Abraham to take his son, Isaac, and offer him as a sacrifice. It was here that the aha moment of monotheism occurred, where a ram was provided in the thicket and the promise was made that Abraham's descendants would be as numerous as the stars. When you look at the foundation stone today, you are looking at the altar of Abraham, the ground zero for the 3 major world religions. While we cannot excavate inside the dome today due to intense political and religious sensitivities, we have the forensic blueprints of history. The Bible says King Solomon chose this exact site, the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite, specifically because of its connection to Abraham's sacrifice. He built a magnificent temple to house the Ark of the Covenant directly over this stone. Later, Herod the Great expanded the platform into the massive plaza we see today. archaeologists and architects have used high-resolution mapping to overlay the biblical dimensions of the temple onto the current rock. On the surface of the foundation stone, there is a distinct rectangular cutout or indentation. When measured, this indentation matches the dimensions of the Ark of the Covenant almost perfectly. This suggests that the Ark didn't just sit in a room, it sat in a specifically carved socket on the very peak of the mountain where Abraham once stood. Beneath the stone lies a natural cavern known as the Well of Souls. Some legends suggest it leads to hidden chambers where the temple treasures were stashed before the Roman invasion. While we may never be allowed to dig beneath it, the fingerprints of the temple are undeniable. The evidence proves that the temple wasn't a spiritual metaphor. It was a massive, gold-clad reality built upon the very stone where Abraham proved his faith. The Tel Dan Stela, the ghost of King David. Was King David real? For the last 200 years, minimalist scholars argued that David was nothing more than a Jewish King Arthur, a mythological figure created to give Israel a glorious past. They said there was zero evidence outside the Bible that he ever drew breath until 1993. The lack of extra-biblical evidence for David was the great silence of archaeology. If David was such a great conqueror, why didn't his enemies mention him? Critics claimed the United Monarchy was a fairy tale. They argued the Bible was written hundreds of years later by people making up a golden age that never happened. Archaeologist Gila Cook was working at a site called Tel Dan in northern Israel. As the sun was setting, she noticed a piece of basalt rock used as a building stone in an ancient wall. On it were faint inscriptions in Aramaic. When the light hit it just right, a phrase jumped out that sent shockwaves through the world of history. The stone was a victory stele erected by a king of Aram, likely Hazael. He was bragging about killing the king of Israel and the king of the house of David. This was the first time the name David had ever been found in an archaeological context from that era. The discovery was so devastating to the David is a myth theory that some critics actually accuse the archaeologists of forging the stone. But then, more fragments were found. The Tel Dan Stele proved that David wasn't a legend. He was the founder of a royal dynasty so famous that even his enemies recognized it by his name 150 years after he died. It turned the ghost of David into a man of flesh, blood, and stone. The walls of Jericho. Imagine a city so fortified, so legendary, that its walls were considered impenetrable. Now imagine those walls didn't just fall, they turned into a ramp for the invaders. This isn't just a Sunday school story. It's a 3,000-year-old forensic mystery. For years, Jericho was the Achilles heel of biblical archaeology. Critics love to point at the site of Tel Sultan and say, look, there's nothing here from the time of Joshua. They claim the city was a ruin long before any Israelites showed up. The famous archaeologist Kathleen Kenyon shook the world in the 1950s when she declared that Jericho was already a ghost town. By the time the Bible says the walls came tumbling down. For decades, the Bible lost this round. But science has a funny way of catching up. Enter Dr. Bryant Wood. He didn't just look at the dirt, he looked at the trash, specifically the pottery. He realized that Kenyon had dated the site based on the absence of expensive imported pottery rather than the presence of the local stuff people actually used. When the carbon dating was reevaluated and the pottery styles were mapped correctly, the timeline shifted perfectly into place. When archaeologists finally peeled back the layers of the mound, they found something that defies military logic. Usually, when a city is besieged, the walls are battered inward. But at Jericho, the red mud brick walls had fallen outward. They collapsed in a way that created a perfect, natural stone ramp leading from the base of the hill straight to the top of the city's inner fortifications. It's exactly what the book of Joshua describes. The wall fell down flat so that the people went up into the city, every man straight before him. But the weirdest part? The grain. Excavators found dozens of jars overflowing with charred grain. In the ancient world, grain was like cash. If you conquered a city, you stole the food. If a city was under siege for months, the people ate the food. Finding full jars of burned grain proves the siege only lasted a few days, just like the 7-day march in the Bible, and that the attackers didn't loot the city, obeying the divine ban described in the text. Jericho wasn't just a story, it was a crime scene frozen in fire and stone. The Pool of Siloam. For 2,000 years, the Pool of Siloam mentioned in the Gospel of John was thought to be a small, quaint church well. But in 2004, a broken sewage pipe revealed that the well was actually a massive Olympic-sized monumental plaza. In John 9, Jesus heals a man born blind by telling him to wash in the Pool of Siloam. Critics often argued that the New Testament writers were outsiders who didn't really know Jerusalem's geography. They claimed the pool was a poetic invention. Even the site tourists visited for years was just a small reservoir built centuries later. The real Siloam was lost to history, or so we thought. In the summer of 2004, a work crew was repairing a large water pipe south of the city of David. As the bulldozer scraped the dirt, it hit something hard: stone steps. Big ones. Archaeologists Eli Shukron and Ronnie Reich were called in. They didn't find a small well. They found a massive 225-foot-long pool with multiple tiers of stone stairs. What makes this intriguing is the timing. Archaeologists found coins buried in the plaster of the steps. The coins were dated to the time of Alexander Jannaeus, and more importantly, to the Great Jewish Revolt. This proves the pool was in active use during the life of Jesus and was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. It was a mikveh, a ritual bath, where millions of pilgrims would wash before heading up to the temple. This discovery changed everything. It proved the author of the Gospel of John knew exactly what he was talking about. The Pool of Siloam wasn't some hidden mystical spring, it was a massive, bustling landmark. When Jesus told the blind man to go there, it was like telling someone in New York to go to the fountain in the middle of Times Square. It was a public, undeniable miracle. Finding these steps was like finding a missing piece of a 2,000-year-old puzzle, confirming that the stage where the New Testament took place was a very real, very physical location. The Dead Sea, the asphalt grave of Sodom. It is the lowest point on Earth, a place so salty that life cannot exist within it. But beneath the surface of the Dead Sea and along its scorched shores lies evidence of a cataclysm so violent it was remembered for 4 millennia. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah, cities destroyed by brimstone and fire, is often dismissed as a morality tale. However, geologists have discovered that the Dead Sea sits directly on a massive fault line where 2 tectonic plates are pulling apart. This isn't just a salty lake, it's a geological time bomb. Archaeologists at the site of Tal el Hammam recently uncovered a layer of destruction debris that sent shockwaves through the scientific community. They found pottery that had been vitrified, turned into glass by temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius. For context, that is hotter than a volcano. They also found melted mud bricks and human remains that had been pulverized. The brimstone mentioned in the Bible is actually pure sulfur. While sulfur is common in volcanic areas, the sulfur balls found around the Dead Sea are unique. They are 98% pure sulfur, encased in a white powdery ash. When lit, they burn with an intense blue flame and can melt through stone. No other place on Earth has these high-purity sulfur balls embedded in the landscape. The Bible says Lot's wife was turned into a pillar of salt. Interestingly, the Dead Sea is home to massive salt diapirs, huge pillars of salt that push up through the Earth. The chemistry of the region explains the fire from heaven as a potential thermal airburst that ignited the massive pockets of natural gas and bitumen under the Dead Sea. It wasn't just a miracle. It was a geological event that left the land uninhabitable for 700 years. The Caiaphas Ossuary. In 1990, a group of kids playing in a park in Jerusalem accidentally fell into a burial cave. Inside, they found a box. Not just any box, a bone box. And on the side, it bore the name of the man who orchestrated the most famous trial in human history, Caiaphas. Joseph Caiaphas is the villain of the Passion story, the high priest who handed Jesus over to Pontius Pilate. For centuries, he was just a name in the Gospels and a brief mention in the writings of Josephus. There was no physical link to him. Skeptics wondered if the corrupt high priest was just a literary foil for the story of Jesus. When archaeologists entered the accidentally discovered tomb, they found 12 ossuaries, stone boxes used to hold bones after the body had decomposed. One of them was spectacular. It was intricately carved with patterns of rosettes, far more beautiful than the others. On the side, it was inscribed twice, Joseph, son of Caiaphas. Inside the box were the bones of 6 people, including a 60-year-old man. Given the lavishness of the box and the specific name, experts believe these are the actual remains of the high priest himself. But the intrigue goes deeper. In one of the other boxes in the same tomb, they found a bronze coin from the reign of Herod Agrippa, dating the tomb perfectly to the mid-1st century. This is one of the few times in history where archaeology has found the physical remains of a person mentioned in the New Testament. It makes the trial of Jesus feel terrifyingly real. You aren't just reading a story about a priest, you are looking at the box that held his bones. This is the ultimate tether between faith and reality, the realization that the people who interacted with Jesus weren't just characters, they were neighbors, politicians, and real men whose graves we can still find today.